Dr. Don Booz is back on Profunda TV with a new book. Your Brain is Lying: How to Silence Your Inner Critic. Dr. Booz is an international executive coach and sought-after speaker. He's a trained French chef and an expert on wines who has a fascination with how the brain works. He's even been called a conversational anthropologist. You are watching Profunda TV with host Phyllis Haynes.
It's a pleasure talking with you again. I'm really excited about your new book, but it's an audacious title, Don. Your
It is.
brain is lying.
Yeah.
How to silence your inner critic. Come on, but your brain is lying. I mean, what did you mean when you took on such a title?
Well, yeah, it is an interesting title, and it gets a lot of attention because people don't normally think that the brain is lying to them. And I didn't come upon this until I just happened upon it about 2 or 3 years ago, and I've been developing this awareness. And finally, my clients said, "You need to write a book." So I wrote the book, and it came with this title. And the title came from one woman in particular. She said, "I'm tired of my brain tell me what to do." And I said, "Well, what does your brain tell you what to do?" And she was saying that the brain tells her that she's an imposter. She doesn't know what she's doing. She just got a new job. And so I started to explore that with her and teaching her a little bit at that point. How do you talk back to your brain when it's not telling the truth? And then I discovered with my other clients that two things happen out of self-talk: is that they develop this imposter syndrome, and then they have limiting beliefs because they've been taught this over a period of years. What happens to the brain and how it develops, and these programs that we've been sending messages. I think one estimates we get about 185,000 negative messages by the time we're 18.
Wow.
And so, yeah, that's incredible. So these started to play out in my own life when I started thinking, well, when did I become aware of my self-talk? I did not have a name for it, but I knew there was something in my head that was repeating what my parents told me. Like, you're not going to amount to anything. You're worthless. My dad even said, you were born on the wrong side of the tracks. I mean, that's how I was taught, and the limiting beliefs that came upon me. It wasn't until I was much later as an adult that I started to figure out I can change these messages. I'm not stupid. And in fact, I started making dean's lists and became pretty successful. So that's how the title came about, just trying to figure out what the brain is doing. It's been an exciting journey with my clients and with myself, just trying to figure out how we can change this or manage ourselves.
Well, you're quite a consultant and coach to numerous high-powered health professionals and institutions. And so you would get feedback if this wasn't working. You must be getting great feedback on your work.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, well, people are their lives are starting to change. They begin to realize that it's not just what's going on in my head, it's my external self-talk as well. So in the book, I am now expanding more, but there's an internal self-talk and there's an external self-talk.
Can you explain those two things, that what the differences are that you mean, external and internal?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the internal we're most familiar with. Our brain speaks to us in a way that we wouldn't let anybody else talk to us who's involved in our lives. But the external self-talk is really said to no one. It's usually spontaneous. It's often a complaint. It's probably a current situation. Like last week, I was walking in the store, and behind me, this woman said, "Oh, it smells like a doctor's office in here." And I turned around, and She said, "Oh, I didn't know you heard me. I wasn't speaking to anyone in particular. I was at a meeting not too long ago, hospital meeting, and someone behind me said, well, this was a waste of time. To no one in particular, just kind of comes out. It's usually spontaneous. I was doing a lecture last week, and it was so funny because this woman started to become aware of her external self-talk. She knocked off some papers on the table, and she said, well, that was stupid of me. And everybody heard her, and we started to laugh. And she started to laugh because she became acutely aware of her external self-talk. Because it just sort of happens. It's really said to no one, and we pick up on it. And my wife and I laugh when either one of us have an external self-talk, and it wasn't really directed at one or the other, but it just comes out about the situation.
You don't think that's a function of age, that that external self-talk is just incrementally increasing as one gets older?
Well, that's true. Research says that we do talk more as we get older. My grandmother was constantly talking to herself, and we were walking around with her wondering who's she talking to, but she used her self-talk to go about her day, what she needed to do, sort of problem solve and that kind of thing. Said to no one, but it was just out there. It's kind of interesting.
Well, your book is very user-friendly. And it's a very practical approach to this problem. But I have to be the devil's advocate a little bit. Can you really stop? Let's talk about the internal self-talk, because that's the one that's been filled by parents and past and all those things. Can you really stop that negative internal self-talk?
Phyllis, it's very simple. You go to settings, you open up Control Center, you tap on emotions, and then you turn off self-talk.
Wouldn't that be great?
I wish it was that easy. I believe firmly that you do not turn off your self-talk. You can manage it. Jill Bolte Taylor, she was a neuroanatomist, still is a neuroanatomist. She had a stroke, and her book is called My Stroke of Insight. And her left part of her brain just left her. And she said, my self-talk totally stopped. She had none of the chatter going on. She calls her self-talk my itty bitty shitty committee, which is a pretty good name for it. But in her case, she had a physical thing happen to her brain, and that's what shut down her self-talk. It's one of the few examples we have of a real life person who documents what happens when you lose your self-talk. So you can't shut it off unless something like that happens, I believe, but you can manage it. I'm teaching my self-talk to be an internal coach instead of an internal critic. And that's been the process.
Well, but I really want to get to the basics, because your book does walk you through, and it's really worth reading. I mean, you come up with wonderful devices. Let's talk about one of your devices, ANTS. Now, ants are really not a pleasant thing to think about. Why do you use ants as a metaphor for dealing with negative self-talk?
Well, that concept came from Daniel Amen, who writes a lot about the brain, and Jack Canfield quoted him at one point. And so I did some research on how Daniel was putting those things together, and I thought, well, that's excellent for what I'm trying to do. I went the extra mile and talked about, for each one of his ants, I think about 8, how to exterminate each one of those ants. I'll give you an example. One of his ants is the always thinking in absolutes, and nothing's going to change. So if someone says, for example, one of the nurse managers said to me, I never get invited to go to the conferences. And that was her internal self-talk talking to me. And so to exterminate that, you have to ask questions like you would a coach. You mean you never get to go to a conference? No one's ever asked you to go to a conference? How do you know you won't ever get asked to go to a conference? And you sort of explore what that ant is doing to this person's limiting beliefs.
But the metaphor has to do with the fact that, that they're kind of hard to control and they get into your system and
Yeah, right.
and they're there all the time. I thought that was an interesting thing that you're talking about, and you're going the extra mile on how to use this device is really helpful. So let me give you one. I have a client, because I also coach people, and I have a client who just believes he's too old, and nothing's going to ever get better, and nothing's ever going to change, and no one's going to buy his stuff and his works. How would you, and this is a really intellectually gifted person. We're not talking about someone who is not sharp, or we're talking about someone with a really sparkling mind. But when it comes to certain things, I hear this repeated, constant, it's, I'm so old, whatever. So how do you deal with that? How do you tackle that?
That's a good question. In my work with clients who are similar, I ask them, where do they hear that message? Because it's got to be coming from somewhere. Mm-hmm. Or who is telling them? Is it self-talk? Is it a parent, a spouse, a friend? What is the beginning part of that limiting belief that this person is putting out there? And then, first of all, I think for this person, your example, what tells them that they aren't going to be accepted or promoted or buy whatever they're selling? In other words, you go with the factual stuff first. What is going on in your life that would tell you that no one's going to like you, buy your stuff, or promote you, or whatever this person seems to want to put out? I think you just have to explore reality with the person, because that's where your brain is lying to you. It's sending messages all the time, and the majority of the messages are default brain function, which is negative, and then we constantly reprogram that, because the quality of our thinking is the quality of our life, and I believe the quality of our thinking comes from the quality of our self-talk.
That's worth saying. That's worth saying again. Say it one more time. The quality of our thinking.
The quality of our thinking is the quality of our life, and I believe the quality of our thinking comes from the quality of our self-talk.
This is a big deal, because we also have media to deal with. I mean, I see media images coming at me all the time that are reinforcing some of the negative stereotypes. And some of them are doing it in reverse now, but that's another show we can talk about, where, some of the things that we thought were things to avoid, like poor eating and obesity, are now becoming mainstreamed as acceptable. Of course, I have my biases, so any viewers who disagree with me, but I think it's still important to eat healthy and to live very consciously. But anyway, isn't the media throwing a lot of negative input into people, especially about aging, thinking that, there's no help for the poor, all kinds of problems that you hear every day. The world is coming to an end. We're not going to get to any of the extremist negative stuff, but it's constant.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with it?
Well, I was listening to Joe Dispenza, one of his talks the other day, and he believes, and I am now taking that stance as well. I've cut off all the feeds into my email about all the politics and all the news, anything that's going on around me. News we don't watch, because I just don't want that to permeate my brain and carry it with me, because it sooner or later it produces a fear factor, and that's what a lot of it doesn't make any difference. At least when I was watching TV on a regular basis, the commercials are based on fear. the politics is based on fear. And these are the things that trigger in my brain what's already there, which is a fear factor that the amygdala picks up on. Am I safe? Am I going to live long? Those kinds of things. And so I think we have to sort of now program our brains in a way that we have control over. And that is, what am I going to listen to and allow to be repeated in those neural pathways, which get stronger the more we hear things, which is what happens with little kids. I mean, I have a 6-year-old granddaughter, and it's been fun to watch her while I was writing this book, incidentally. Her self-talk developed. And it starts, in the research, it starts about 3 to 5 years old. When I talk to people in my workshops and my lectures, most people talk about in their teenage years, they pick up that they have the self-talk going on. And that comes from repeated messages over and over again. It doesn't make any difference whether it's coming from the media or from our parents or friends. Our brain sort of attaches onto that, and it gets repeated over and over again. And it becomes, as I was talking about, a limiting belief, an imposter syndrome, or something that we carry with us on into adulthood. So I'm concerned about what I'm listening to. I enjoy listening to music a lot more than I ever did before. I even have I'm a football fan, or basketball, whatever the sports is going on. I don't even listen to those announcers anymore. I just have music playing in the background when we're watching the game.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, I avoid really bad horror movies because I understand the impact on the brain. But I do think that your book takes us through how to become a self-coach. Right. So it sounds to me like it's a discipline to some degree. And yes. You even talk in the book about listening. So let me ask you, how do you listen to yourself differently now that you have this understanding? Are you more conscious? Are you listening more deeply to yourself?
I believe I am. I think my wife would agree with that statement. For me, I used to be, when someone was talking, I would think, okay, how do I respond to this? Which is listening, but I'm not sure it's full attention listening. So I breathe a lot deeper during conversations, as I've been doing in our conversation. And I allow my brain to get some oxygen up to the prefrontal cortex. And I play back what I called in my first book and continue to promote the emotional intelligence way of responding to people. And that is asking the 3 questions. It's a filter I use all the time. And that is, does it need to be said? Does it need to be said by me? And does it need to be said by me now? And that's how my brain is coaching me whenever I'm in a conversation, especially if it's a intense, stressful type of conversation. That plays back in my brain almost continuously in any conversation. Do I need to respond? Do I need to respond now? You can change that said into anything. I need to send this text message. And so that's a very helpful coaching thing that my self-talk is doing for me every day. It seems like I run that through my brain and keeps me from saying or doing something even more stupid than what I would have done in the first response.
Well, you work with, as I said, medical institutions. It would seem to me that doctors and nurses and support staff would benefit from this kind of learning, this kind of device, this kind of pausing before responding. But then again, the institution has the pressure of time constraints. Yes. Do you get a chance to give this kind of input inside hospitals?
I do. I was at a hospital last week giving this lecture on my book, which what they wanted to hear. There was only one doctor in the group, and the rest were all nurse managers and a few administrators. And there was about 25 or 30 people, which is a pretty good size for the size of this hospital. And there were some good questions. What people take away and use, I'm not sure what they will do. Doctors tend to be, from my experience, a little bit harder to take the time to sit down and want to look at themselves under a microscope a little bit more. In other words, how am I coming across? What am I saying? I haven't had conversations with a doctoral group or doctors in a group, but I would love to, I would covet to have that opportunity, because I think it can be changing professionally and personally in people's lives if they take some of this and use it.
Well, there's one other place where your book could have tremendous impact. I'm thinking about my own early education experiences and school and things that teachers said that either inspired or knocked you down completely. So I'm just thinking your book, also a sequel to your book, you know, is the power of language, speaking. What you say to others has a tremendous impact. We started this interview talking about the early programming of children, how they hear that negative information from their some parents. So let's say you had a magic wand and we didn't have any political divide and everything was clearer to get some impact in the school system. What would you change in the teaching structure? And give yourself time to think about this. What would you change?
Just contextually, one of my beliefs about self-talk is that it's a progressive disorder. My 6-year-old granddaughter is totally unaware of self-talk. What's interesting is that her teacher, and she's now in 1st grade, I actually gave her my book and signed it a couple weeks ago because I was so impressed with what she was doing with my granddaughter's class. What everybody else is doing at school, I don't know. But she is having them take a time out and talk about their feelings. In other words, get it out of your head and into the open. But even more helpful, I think this teacher is teaching children how to breathe deeply. And that we know from all the research in neuroscience that oxygen to the brain, when we have an amygdala hijack, goes to the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex shuts down. And we have all kinds of crazy things that can happen. But when we're breathing deeply, we're allowing ourselves to think and calm down the amygdala. And that's where a lot of issues start anyway. So if I were to do anything in the school system, other than to teach some awareness about self-talk, I think it would be teaching children how to breathe and how to feel safe in their breath. Teach them deep breathing, not just shallow breathing, so that they can slow down. I know Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence has a 4-color grid that talks about the emotions, whether I'm high energy, low energy. My granddaughter's teacher is teaching them to metaphorically talk about their emotions. You know, I feel like a rainbow. I feel like a thunderstorm. Stuff that they can understand at that level, what they're bringing into the classroom every day. Because we know what comes with this is this flood of emotions. I mean, if my wife and I have a disagreement, which is very rare, and we don't have a chance to resolve it, I carry that with me all day long. And I keep processing in my mind. My self-talk is, okay, what am I going to say when I get home? I rehearse it, which is the beauty of self-talk. Coaching myself, what is the best way I can respond to what happened, say, this morning? So one of the images we have of self-talk is various sources, but one of my sources comes from Tim Conway's character on the Carol Burnett show. He's an older man. He has a raincoat and scruffy hair, just mumbling as he goes along. And that's what we have as a vision of self-talk. Erving Goffman said that we have a taboo against self-talk, and the research I did, I found that only 29% of the introductory psychology textbooks for college students even mention self-talk. So I still think we have a taboo and secrecy around self-talk, but like with my clients, once we start sharing our self-talk, we realize the impact self-talk has on how we function in this world. And so that's kind of exciting to see, at least from where I'm going with this book, that people are responding to that. Yeah, I have self-talk too. And now I'm more aware of how to manage it.
And I didn't ask you a question that I would like to ask, which is about the automatic quality of self-talk. I mean, it's a reactive,
Yeah.
For many people, it's reactive and they don't even notice they have self-talk.
Yeah. I know, and it's I live with a person, my wife, for 50 years, and it's been fun to watch her progression of self-awareness of her self-talk. I mean, now she's able to say, oh, that was my external self-talk. You don't need to respond. Or my self-talk is telling me that our daughter wants us to do yada, yada, yada. So once you become aware, or once we become aware of our self-talk, we begin to see it, all over the place. One of the things I wanted to point out is Jim Gaffigan is my favorite comedian right now. And Jim has the ability to go into a third person when he's talking about something that he said. So I played this clip of him talking about Jesus, and then he goes into his self-talk, which is a projection of the self-talk of the audience that are listening to him. And he says, oh, he's going to go to hell for that, in this higher voice when he's talking to third person about himself. What's interesting as I watched this clip is that the laughter, they showed the audience, the laughter got louder when he did his self-talk projected onto the audience, because many of them probably felt, yeah, he's going to go to hell talking about Jesus that way. So it's kind of interesting.
Well, that's great. I love talking to you. Thank you so much. And this will wrap it up for us. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Phyllis.